Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. It happened on one of those quiet evenings when time seems to move slower than usual. The kind where the air feels heavy with thoughts you haven't said out loud yet. I had just finished dinner, a simple bowl of soup, and was sitting by the window, half listening to the radio while pretending to read a book. I remember the way the rain tapped gently on the glass, like it was reminding me that the world outside still existed. Then, the knock came. 3 steady knocks, not hurried, not hesitant, but deliberate. The kind that belongs to someone who knows you'll answer. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. I wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not at that hour. When I opened the door, there he was, my boss, Mr. Carter. He stood there with his coat collar turned up, raindrops still clinging to his shoulders. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of tiredness and something deeper, something that made my stomach tighten just a little. "Evening, Claire," he said softly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." I didn't know what to say at first. I had never seen him outside the office, and certainly never imagined him standing in my doorway. There was a strange vulnerability about him that evening. Gone was the confident tone he carried in meetings, replaced by something quieter, more human. "No, not at all," I finally replied, stepping aside. "Come in, before you catch a cold." He smiled, a faint, uncertain smile, and stepped inside. The smell of rain followed him, mixing with the scent of my chamomile tea. I offered to make him some, and he accepted, glancing around the small living room as if he was trying to remember how to relax. For a while, we didn't speak much. The only sounds were the soft clinking of cups and the rain against the window. I could feel the tension, not the uncomfortable kind, but the one that fills the air when two people sense that something important is about to be said. He looked down at his hands, then at me. "I didn't come here for work," he began. "I hope you'll believe me when I say that." I nodded, curious, though my heart had already started to beat a little faster. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he continued. "You've been with the company for nearly 8 years. You've seen it all, the changes, the stress, the people coming and going. But lately, I've noticed you seem distant. Not unhappy, but quieter." I didn't want to ignore that. His words caught me off guard. For weeks I had been hiding behind polite smiles and small talk. Work had felt heavier than usual, and so had life. My divorce had left its shadow on me, though I thought I was doing a good job pretending otherwise. I took a slow breath. "You noticed," I said, more as a statement than a question. "I did," he answered gently. "You've always been someone I could count on, calm, dependable. But even the strongest people need someone to ask how they're really doing." Something in his tone disarmed me completely. It wasn't pity, it was genuine concern, the kind that makes you feel seen without judgment. For the first time in months, I let my guard down. "It's been a strange year," I admitted. "After everything that happened, I thought throwing myself into work would help. But I guess some things just follow you, no matter where you go." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I understand that more than you might think." The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the silence that followed. Outside, the rain had turned into a light drizzle. He leaned back slightly, his shoulders relaxing. "You know," he said after a pause, "when my wife passed 5 years ago, I did the same thing. Buried myself in work, convinced myself that if I stayed busy, I wouldn't have to feel anything. But grief doesn't disappear. It just waits." His honesty struck something deep in me. It wasn't the kind of conversation you expect to have with your boss in your living room, yet it felt oddly natural, like two people standing at the same crossroads in life, quietly recognizing the other's pain. "I'm sorry," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "Don't be. Life has its way of humbling us all." For a while, we just sat there, two people who had been strangers outside of work, suddenly sharing pieces of themselves they hadn't shown anyone in years. The room felt warmer somehow, filled with an unspoken understanding. He looked around the room again, his eyes landing on a framed photo of my daughter on the shelf. She looks like you, he said. She has my stubbornness, I replied with a small laugh. She's studying abroad now. I miss her terribly. I know that feeling, he murmured. You never stop being a parent, even when they're grown. There was a softness in his voice I hadn't heard before. I could tell he was remembering something, or someone. For a moment, it felt like our lives had quietly overlapped, two stories running parallel without ever realizing how similar they were. As he finished his tea, he stood up slowly. I should let you rest, he said. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I followed him to the door. Thank you, I said. For noticing. And for coming by. He hesitated at the doorway, looking out at the dark street. Sometimes, he said, people need to talk without expecting anything in return. I guess tonight, we both did. And with that, he left, walking down the wet path, his figure fading into the misty rain. I stood there for a while, watching the reflection of the streetlights shimmer on the pavement. It wasn't a grand moment or a dramatic revelation, but it felt significant in its quietness. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible that night. I couldn't sleep right away. I kept thinking about the way he looked when he said grief waits, not as a warning, but as someone who had made peace with it. And for some reason, that thought brought me a strange kind of comfort. I didn't know what would come of it, if we'd ever talk like that again, or if it was just a single evening carved out of time. But it made me realize something I had forgotten. Sometimes, healing begins not with answers, but with being heard, and that's how it all started. The next few days after his visit felt different. The air in the office seemed lighter, though nothing visible had changed. Mr. Carter still moved through the hallways with his calm authority, still wore his pressed suits and soft grey ties, but there was a quiet understanding between us now, an invisible thread that made each shared glance feel almost like a continuation of that evening. I didn't tell anyone about his visit. It wasn't something to gossip about. It had been human, real. And in a world where everyone pretends to be fine, that felt rare. It was Wednesday when he called me into his office. Claire, he said from the doorway, do you have a minute? I nodded, holding a folder against my chest as I followed him inside. His office always smelled faintly of cedar and coffee, the kind of mix that felt grounding. The blinds were half closed, the afternoon light slanting through them in golden stripes that painted the desk. He gestured toward the chair across from him. I was thinking about what we talked about the other night, he began. I hope I didn't overstep. I shook my head immediately. Not at all. Actually, I'm glad you came by. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk until then. He smiled, that same subtle smile that didn't need words to feel genuine. I know the feeling. For a moment, silence filled the space between us, not awkward, just thoughtful. He looked out the window, watching a few leaves drift past. You know, he said slowly, when you've been through enough loss, you start to notice it in others. It's like recognizing your own reflection in someone else. I let his words settle before replying. Maybe that's why people like us end up in offices late, working when everyone else has gone home. He chuckled softly. Maybe. Or maybe we just don't like being alone with our thoughts. That made me smile, because it was true. Loneliness doesn't always look like sadness sometimes. It's just keeping busy so the silence doesn't swallow you whole. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. I've been thinking, he said, about how we can make things easier for the team and maybe for you, too. You've taken on more than anyone else lately. I'd like you to help me with the new client relations project. It took me a moment to process it. That was one of the most important ongoing projects, something usually reserved for senior managers. I don't know what to say, I murmured. Say yes, he replied simply. You've earned it. There was no formality in his tone, just quiet conviction. And something in his eyes, trust, maybe, that reminded me why I'd stayed at the company all these years. Not for the job itself, but for moments when people like him made it feel meaningful. I'll do my best, I said, feeling a spark of confidence I hadn't felt in months. I know you will, he said, smiling again. You always do. When I left his office, I felt lighter, like I'd been given not just responsibility, but a reason to believe in myself again. For the first time in a while, I caught my reflection in the glass door, and I didn't just see a tired woman trying to hold everything together. I saw someone capable. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I stayed behind to organize my notes. The building was quiet, just the hum of computers and the faint buzz of the overhead lights. I was gathering my things when I heard footsteps. "Still here?" His voice was calm, familiar. I turned to see Mr. Carter standing by the doorway, jacket slung over his arm. "Just finishing up," I said. "I didn't realize it was this late." He checked his watch. "Time flies when you're busy saving the company," he said lightly. I laughed. "Something like that." He stepped closer, looking around the room. "You know, I used to love the office at this hour," he said. "There's something peaceful about it, the quiet, the sense that you've done your part for the day." I nodded. "It feels like the building finally exhales." He seemed to like that, because he smiled faintly. Then his tone softened. "I wasn't sure if I should say this, but, the other night, after I left your house, I realized it had been a long time since I talked to someone who actually listened. So, thank you for that." His honesty took me off guard again, the same way it had that evening. "You were the one who listened," I replied. "I just answered." "Maybe that's what real conversation is," he said quietly. "Not talking to be understood, but listening to feel less alone." The way he said it, thoughtful, sincere, made something inside me ache, not with sadness, but with recognition. He wasn't just my boss at that moment. He was another person trying to make sense of life, just like me. We stood there for a while, looking out the window at the city lights below. The rain from earlier had stopped, leaving the streets glistening. I thought of how strange it was that a simple conversation could change how you saw someone entirely. When he finally turned to leave, he said, "You should get home, Claire. It's late." "But I'm glad we talked." "Me too," I said, and I meant it. After he left, I stayed a few more minutes, just sitting at my desk, thinking. There was something profoundly comforting in knowing that even after loss, after years of keeping your guard up, you could still connect with someone unexpectedly, honestly, without pretense. That night, when I drove home, the streets were nearly empty. The world felt calm, suspended. I thought about how people cross paths for reasons they rarely understand at first. Maybe his visit hadn't been about work at all. Maybe it had been the start of two people remembering what empathy felt like, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't dread tomorrow. A week passed, and with each day, the project drew us closer together. It wasn't intentional. Life simply found small ways to weave our paths tighter: a shared coffee break, a quiet moment after a meeting, the way he'd stop by my desk to ask how I was managing before heading home. There was never anything inappropriate, never anything beyond words. But sometimes, words are more powerful than anything else. We began spending late afternoons in the small conference room, planning presentations, reviewing notes. The windows faced west, and every evening, the sun would pour in, painting everything in shades of gold. It was in those hours that I began to notice things I hadn't before: the way his voice softened when he was thinking, the way he'd pause before giving advice, careful not to sound like he was ordering. One evening, as I packed my notes into a folder, he said quietly, "You've changed, you know." I looked up, half smiling. "Changed? I hope for the better." He nodded. "Definitely for the better. There's more light in you now. I see it." His words caught me off guard. Compliments from him were rare, not because he was cold, but because he was careful with what he said. That's what made them mean something. I didn't know how to respond, so I said the first honest thing that came to mind. I think that evening helped me let go of something I didn't realize I was still holding on to. He tilted his head slightly, curious. What was that? The idea that I had to keep everything together all the time. That if I stopped pretending to be fine, everything would fall apart. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "That's a hard habit to break." "I know it well. Do you?" I asked gently. He smiled faintly. "Yes. 4 years, I wore the face of a man who had it all figured out: a company, a reputation, a purpose. But inside, I was just surviving. There was a silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. Outside, the sun had begun to set, streaking the sky in deep orange and lavender. I could hear the faint hum of traffic below, the distant life of the city carrying on. "You ever wonder," he asked quietly, "what life would look like if we hadn't spent so much time being strong for everyone else?" The question hung in the air. I thought about it, the years spent worrying about others, carrying burdens that no one had asked me to carry. "Maybe we'd have been a little freer," I said softly. He nodded. "Or maybe we'd still find something new to hold on to. I think that's just human nature, we need to feel needed." He said it with such quiet wisdom that it stayed with me long after that evening ended. The following days, our conversations became a kind of quiet ritual, a few stolen minutes of honesty amid the noise of work. He'd ask about my daughter, about the music I listened to, even about the books I never had time to finish. I found myself looking forward to those moments, not because of what they meant, but because they reminded me of something simple, that connection didn't always need a reason. One afternoon, I found him in the break room, standing by the window with a cup of coffee. The rain had returned, drumming softly against the glass. He turned when he heard me. "Seems like rain follows us," I said with a small smile. He chuckled. "Maybe it knows we think better when it's raining." I joined him by the window. For a while, we just watched the grey clouds rolling across the city. There was something peaceful in it, two people standing side by side, saying nothing, yet feeling understood. He broke the silence first. "You know, I used to think leadership was about keeping distance. About staying composed so people could rely on you. But I'm starting to think it's the opposite, that maybe leadership starts with honesty." "That's brave of you to say," I said softly. "Most people in your position wouldn't admit that." "Maybe that's why I'm telling you," he replied. The sincerity in his tone made me look at him, really look at him, not as my boss, but as a man who had carried his share of pain, who had kept his dignity through quiet resilience. There was strength in that, but also gentleness. "You've helped me more than you realize, Claire," he said after a pause. That night, I went home and sat by the window for hours, thinking about things I hadn't let myself remember. I think I'd forgotten how to talk to someone without wearing armor. I felt a lump form in my throat. "Then maybe we helped each other," I said quietly. He smiled, his eyes softening in that way they did when he meant something. "Maybe we did." The sound of the rain grew heavier, blurring the city lights beyond the glass. There was something intimate in that quiet, not in a romantic sense, but in the way two souls recognize one another's solitude. When the clock struck 7, he sighed softly. "You should head home before it gets worse out there," he said. "I will," I replied, gathering my things. "You too, before the rain decides to trap us here." He laughed under his breath. "Wouldn't be the worst thing." I smiled as I turned to leave, but his words lingered. Not because they were bold, they weren't, but because of the warmth beneath them. That night, as I drove home through the rain, I realized how strange it was that healing could happen so quietly. No grand gestures, no dramatic moments, just the steady, patient kindness of two people remembering how to speak honestly again. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe the storms in my life weren't something to fear anymore. Maybe they were just reminders that even in the rain, there could be light. It's strange how life can shift so quietly, almost without you realizing it. One day blends into the next, but somewhere in between, something changes, not loudly, not dramatically, but gently, like the light that moves across a room through the course of a day. That's what those weeks felt like after the rain, a gradual unfolding of calm I hadn't known in a long time. Mr. Carter and I continued to work together closely. The new project grew, and so did the trust between us. We learned to communicate in those small, wordless ways that happen only when two people truly pay attention. He could tell when I was overthinking something. I could sense when his mind was elsewhere. It wasn't about reading each other's thoughts, it was about noticing. One Friday evening, after a long meeting, he stopped by my office. Everyone else had gone home. The light outside was dim, the city already shifting into dusk. "Do you ever feel," he asked from the doorway, "like you're watching your own life from a distance? Like you've built this whole world around yourself, but somehow, you're still standing on the outside of it?" The question caught me off guard. I looked up from my papers, meeting his eyes. There was no pretense in them, no professional tone. Just quiet sincerity, all the time, I admitted. Sometimes I look around and think, how did I get here? I thought by now I'd have it all figured out. He nodded slowly. Me too. I used to think success would bring clarity. But sometimes, it just builds higher walls. That sentence stayed with me. The way he said it, not bitterly, just with tired acceptance, made me realize how much we both had lived our lives trying to stay composed for others. We were two people who had mastered the art of keeping it together, even when we were breaking quietly inside. He came in, taking a seat across from me. The office was almost dark now, the soft glow from the desk lamp painting a circle of warm light around us. Outside, the last colors of the sunset lingered faintly on the horizon. Claire, he said, I wanted to thank you again. Not for the project, though that's going well, but for the conversations we've had. They've reminded me that life still has room for connection. For understanding. I smiled softly. You don't have to thank me. You reminded me, too, that not every chapter of life has to be about loss. Some can just be about being seen. He nodded, and then, for a while, we said nothing. There was no need. The quiet between us wasn't empty, it was full of everything we'd said and everything we didn't need to. After a few minutes, he stood up and walked to the window. The city lights reflected faintly against the glass, tiny specks of gold in the deepening blue. You know, he said, almost to himself, my late wife used to tell me that people don't really move on, they move forward. There's a difference. I watched him carefully. She sounds wise. She was, he said with a soft smile. She had this way of finding light in everything. I think I forgot how to do that after she passed. Until recently. He turned then, and for the briefest moment, his eyes met mine, steady, kind, full of quiet gratitude. You helped me remember, Claire. I don't know if you realize that. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened slightly. You helped me too, I finally managed. In ways I can't really explain. Something shifted in that moment, not romance, not longing, but a mutual recognition. The kind that exists between two souls who've carried heavy things and found someone who understands the weight. The rain began again, softly tapping against the window like it always did during our important conversations. He smiled, hearing it. Seems like it never forgets to join us. I laughed quietly. Maybe it knows we talk better when it rains. He chuckled, the sound low and genuine. Then, after a pause, he said, I'm leaving town for a few days next week. The board's called a conference. But when I get back, I'd like us to keep building what we've started, both with the project and whatever this is. I nodded. I'd like that. When he left that evening, he didn't say goodbye in the usual way. He just gave a small nod and that same faint smile, the one that said everything words didn't need to. I watched him go, his figure fading down the quiet hallway, until the sound of the elevator doors closing broke the stillness. That night, as I drove home, the streets shimmered from the rain. The wipers brushed slowly across the windshield, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone in the world. There was a peace that came from knowing that connection, real, human connection, could still find you, even after years of silence. Over the weekend, I found myself thinking about all the versions of myself I had been, the young woman who dreamed of a perfect life, the mother who tried to hold everything together, the colleague who hid her exhaustion behind polite smiles. And now, this version, one who had learned that strength isn't about enduring everything alone, but about allowing someone to see you when you're no longer pretending. When Monday came, I returned to work with a quiet sense of purpose. The world hadn't changed, the same papers waited on my desk, the same sounds filled the halls, but I had. I felt lighter, more open, and though he wasn't there that day, I caught myself glancing at his empty office once or twice, not out of longing, but gratitude. Because sometimes, the people who come into our lives unexpectedly don't stay forever. They simply arrive to remind us who we still are underneath everything we've carried. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the first drops of rain began to fall again, I looked out the window and smiled. Not every story has to end with grand gestures or declarations. Some just end quietly, with understanding, respect, and a shared memory that softens life in all the right places. And that's how my boss's visit, that one unexpected evening, became something more than just a conversation. It became the start of healing, of rediscovering kindness, and of remembering that even in life's rainiest moments, there's always someone who listens.